Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report. I'm Yasmin Khatun and I'll be taking a look at the stories that matter to you, discussing news stories from throughout the week and the ones that you've all been talking about. On The Report, we love to hear what you think, and to join the conversation, get tweeting using hashtag The Report. Later on in the programme, we'll be going through the topics that have been trending throughout the week. Before we get into the conversation, let's have a look at some of the week's news.
As violence broke out in the Gaza Strip overnight, 4 Palestinians have been killed and 5 Israeli soldiers injured. 3 of the Palestinians were killed by an Israeli airstrike, with the other fatality, 23-year-old Rabeh Barakwe, killed by tank fire. Clashes broke out in the area after a number of Israeli tanks crossed the border fence into the Gaza Strip. The Israeli attack came after soldiers were left wounded by a bomb as they were destroying a tunnel found last month, running from Gaza to Israel. Hamas has said that Israeli tanks entered the Gaza side of the border and had remained there for several hours, adding that an Israeli helicopter had also fired a rocket in the area. This comes as 26 Palestinian prisoners, released by Israel, have arrived into the West Bank, and a further 5 others crossing into the Gaza Strip. Israel released the 26 prisoners late on Tuesday as part of an agreement with the Palestinian National Authority. The US brokered deal was reached as Israel and Palestine agreed to resume their peace negotiations in July. The International Chemical Weapons Watchdog has announced that Syria has destroyed or rendered inoperable all of its declared chemical weapons production and mixing facilities, meeting a major deadline in an ambitious disarmament programme.
The Syrian government has completed what we call the functional destruction of its entire chemical weapons making apparatus and water mixing filling equipment for use with sarin gas. So it no longer has the capacity to manufacture new chemical weapons agents.
The Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said its teams had inspected 21 out of the 23 chemical weapons sites across the country.
There were 2 sites that it was just deemed too risky. They were not able to offer the necessary security guarantees for our inspectors to visit those sites.
The next target date is November the 15th, by when the OPCW and Syria must agree to a detailed plan of destruction, including how and where to destroy more than 1,000 metric tons of toxic agents and munitions. Damascus agreed to destroy all its chemical weapons after Washington threatened to use force in response to the killing of hundreds of people in a sarin gas attack in August. It was the world's deadliest in 25 years. 4 female politicians in Turkey have attended General Assembly, wearing their headscarves in Parliament, the first since an attempt in 1999. Belma Satir, deputy of Turkey's ruling AKP, said this was an important decision.
Bugün inşallah başörtüsünü tercih eden, özel hayatlarını bugünden sonra başörtüyle devam etmek isteyen kadın milletvekillerimiz başörtüyle gelecekler ve bundan sonra da böyle devam edecektir. Bunun artısı Türkiye toplumu iyice birbirine kaynaşacak, yasaklar kalkacak. Zaten olmayan yasağın uygulamadaki sıkıntısını da çözmüş olacağız.
This comes as a decades-old ban on wearing the hijab in other state institutions was lifted this month. Opposition from secularists is thought to have deterred female lawmakers from wearing their headscarves in the past. Turkey's main opposition and secularist Republican People's Party has said it will contest the move.
Kendine oy veren kitleleri toparlamak amacıyla böyle bir konuyu istismar ediyor. Biz de bu istismar etmeyi halkımızın artık kabul etmeyeceğini düşünüyoruz. Çünkü 11 yıldır iktidarda olan bir parti daha geçen yıl reddederken bugün getiriyorsa bunun altında bir bit yeniği vardır.
An excavation is underway of what may be the largest mass grave of ethnic cleansing victims in Bosnia. The site has, until now, been covered up by a Serbian wall of silence. Bosnia's Institute for Missing Persons had known for years about the Tomasika site, but the exact location and details of the victims were known only to local Bosnian Serb witnesses who had remained silent since the end of the 1992 to 1995 war. It is not known why they remained silent.
Na dubini od oko 10 metara tijela su pobacana jedna preko drugih. Uz tijela pronađeni su i lični dokumenti, tako da mi možemo reći da su do sada pronađeni posmrtni ostaci stanovnika Bišćana, Sredica, Rizvanovića i Čarakova. Riječ je o civilima bošnjačke i hrvatske nacionalnosti ubijenim.
100,000 people were killed as a result of the war 2 decades ago in a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Bosnian Muslims. The remains of 360 people have been exhumed to date. Tomasika is one of 445 grave sites, and some 1,200 bodies are still being searched for. Francis Legg, reporting for Islam Channel.
Now, with me to discuss some of those stories are analysts Shabir Razvi and Julian Weinberg. Also joining me later on in the programme will be Dr. Fouad Ali from the Developmentia Project and Abdulaziz Al-Dawish from Gatehouse Bank. Now, we saw a few different stories there. One of the things I wanted to touch upon first was Palestine. This is the first sort of major aggression we're seeing since November. Is this likely to incite more? Julian?
I think it shows, how quickly these things can escalate and how fragile the situation is, even if it's been perhaps quieter on the border than it has at other times. And also indicates the need at some point to have a more broader engagement in the peace process in order to try and find a way to manage these sorts of things.
Shabir?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tragedy in Palestine has been going on for last 62 years since the inception of the Zionist state there. And there's been dialogue continuously for that period of time.
Well, Israel says that the aggression was a result of tunnels that have been formed by Hamas.
Well, they may say that, but the reality of the situation is that the attacks that take place from the Israeli side are completely disproportionate to what Hamas may or may not do or have done in the past. So really to sort of put it in that perspective that Hamas is creating this sort of, as Julian said, the fragile situation even worse, is really disingenuous of the Israeli authorities. It's quite outrageous when they say that Hamas instigates the problem, but the reality is that occupation continues, development is taking place on occupied territories, which were occupied since 1967. So there's a whole host of difficulties that Israel is creating for the Palestinians and in Gaza Strip. I mean, Gaza, everyone, whoever has visited, I haven't, unfortunately, perhaps inshallah I will sometime, it's like an open prison of 1.5 million people. So it's not an easy environment to live in.
We're now seeing drone strikes coming from Israel. Is this going to be a new type of warfare in those lands? Julian?
I wouldn't know. It may well be, but I think the point about Gaza and the siege from now all sides, with almost all the tunnels having been destroyed and the power plant going down today, I think again illustrates not just a fragile but a highly explosive situation actually that could occur.
Well, the OPCW, moving on to Syria, have said that chemical weapons have been cleared. This is quite early on. We initially heard comments of, a year, 2 years. This could take a long time. Now, within weeks, months, is this something that we can actually believe or take on as a step forward?
Well, look, as far as the chemical weapons issue is concerned, and Syria has been quite happy and open to destroy all the chemical weapons that they have. Yes, the time frame, I mean, I'm not an expert on the destruction of what's...
But they've said 2 sites they've not been able to visit,
Yeah,
right?
because of the security issues, as your opening comment was saying. But what I do want to relate that to is what's happening in Gaza, if you like. All the opposition group in Syria, which are sort of trying to get rid of Assad, why don't they come to Gaza and fight Israel, rather than sort of doing ethnic cleansing in Syria itself? So, Christians are being killed there, other so-called heretic Muslims are being killed in Syria by the opposition group. If they're that much interested in Muslim welfare, then perhaps they should move their focus to Hamas.
Syria, the Assad regime still haven't acknowledged or have led any claim that they've used any of these chemical weapons.
Absolutely.
So, with the United Nations now saying that they've possibly ridded themselves of any chemical weapons that possibly could have been there, this must be a step forward. No?
It is.
Julian?
Absolutely.
I think it is a step forward. Obviously, everything needs to be verified, and as I understand it, this is the beginning of a longer process. But it does open the potential door to a political solution, which I think is in everyone's interest.
Well, political solutions. We heard from the Prime Minister of Russia, who said that any negotiations shouldn't be thinking that the removal of Assad is on the table, because it isn't. Is that something that other foreign powers are likely to concede?
Sorry.
No, you go.
Yeah. No, I think, look, removal of Assad is always been on the agenda of Western powers, because even before the conflict became as explosive as it is now, regime change was the sort of primary objective in Washington, in London, and Paris.
Isn't that why we've seen such a strong stance from Russia? Because they've said they're not going to let this be another Libya.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue of Assad is something that the Syrians, should they both go to the table in Geneva, should try and discuss how to take that forward. The opposition has really failed to offer a cohesive alternative to galvanise the population, and that has left Assad, I think, with a large proportion of the population still with him or undecided on him. So in that sense, I think one has to look at the facts of why Syria has gone the way it has, and so many people have died, but there hasn't been any kind of solution up until now.
But I know we just saw in that clip Bosnia, and that we're looking at ethnic cleansing, 100,000 people killed 2 decades ago. In Syria, we're seeing the same sort of figures now, the numbers well above 100,000. As to whether or not any chemical weapons have been removed, we've seen killing on a massive scale. Are we not going to see any repercussions coming off of that?
Well, look, again, one's got to really identify where the killing was taking place. We know that the opposition groups that are fighting Assad are fragmented. They have used inhuman forms of activity on the ground by killing human beings, eating their body parts, and ethnic cleansing has taken place. I mean, there have been. I've been to Syria before. I've been to Aleppo. I've been to other places in the past where there is significant Christian population. Now the Christians are being ethnically cleansed from Syria. It's inhuman. It's completely outrageous that the opposition group fight under the banner of Islam and are not really implementing anything Islamic.
On both sides, we've seen many deaths. We are going to have to move on.